And what I discovered is that if you let people swear a little, you can marry a very complex socio-technical critique to a fun, dirty word. And people will give you the time of day. They'll pay attention. And so I coined this term Enshittification.
Enshittification, een verzamelnaam voor alles waar het internet aan kapot gaat. Zoals zoeken op Google, wat verworden is tot een spelletje advertenties ontwijken. Of de vuile trucs van algoritmes die online prijzen honderden keren per minuut aanpassen.
I was the European director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation for many years. That means going to a lot of conferences and doing a lot of speaking and doing a lot of stumping. And so I, at one point, just started saving badges. Now I have a lot of them.
Cory Doctorow schrijft en spreekt al jaren over hoe de grote techbedrijven zijn geliefde internet kapen. Maar ziet de problemen van de digitale wereld ook steeds vaker in de echte wereld terug.
We are seeing the incursion of enshittification into every sector as it becomes digitalized, right? You add computers to it and you add enshittification to it.
Enshittification heeft inmiddels een eigen Wikipedia-pagina en een Nederlandse vertaling. Platformverval. Maar dat klinkt veel te netjes voor iets wat Doctorow ziet als een ernstige plaag die zich in snel tempo verspreidt. Wij houden het dan ook op verkuttificatie.
Maybe we'll take this in more than one part, because doing all of that in one go is a little long. I'll tell you how platforms go bad, what the symptoms would be if we were going to call this like a pandemic. In the first instance, you have platforms that are good to their end users. And as they're doing this, they're also finding ways to lock those end users in. So we can use Facebook as an example here.
Hey everyone. Hey everyone.
When Facebook opened up to the general public in 2006, they had this pitch, which was like, we are like MySpace, except we will respect your privacy. We'll never spy on you. And we're going to respect your attention. We're only going to show you the things you asked to see. So come to Facebook and tell us who matters to you. And that's all you're going to see. And no one's going to spy on you while you read what they have to say. And as they were doing this, they were also finding ways to lock users in. And lucky for Facebook with social media, the lock-in comes for free. And when you've got 200 friends on Facebook, and some of them are there because they emigrated from another country, and that's how they stay in touch with their family and friends, and some are there because their kids play a sport, and that's how the parents coordinate the carpool, and some of them are there because that's where their customers or their audiences are, and some are there because they've got a rare disease, and that's where the people who have their rare disease gather for support. It can be really hard to leave. And so the more people there are on Facebook, the harder it is to leave Facebook. And so once the users get locked into Facebook, that phase one, where you're good to the end users, gives way to phase two, which is when you start to abuse the end users, knowing that leaving is expensive and they're apt to stay, even if you make things worse for them, in order to make things better for business customers. And so in the case of Facebook, they went to the advertisers and they said, do you remember we told these rubes that we weren't going to spy on them? That was a total lie. We are spying on them from asshole to appetite. Give us a remarkably small amount of money and we will laser target ads to them. We've got a whole building full of engineers we pay to detect ad fraud. You give us $1 to show a specific user an ad, that dollar is going to go to pay for an ad for that user. So the business customers pile into the platform too, and they get locked to it as well because they become dependent on that business. And so this is the third stage of enshittification, clawing back all the value from business customers and end users, leaving behind just enough value, a kind of homeopathic residue that is sufficient to keep users locked to each other and business customers locked to users. And all the value is drawn out and handed to shareholders and executives. And at that point, you are like right on the brink of the platform collapsing, because the difference between, God, I hate Facebook, but I can't seem to stop using it, and God, I hate Facebook and I'm never coming back here again, it's razor thin. So you get like one live stream mass shooting, one giant privacy scandal, one whistleblower, and people bolt for the exits, and Wall Street goes crazy because they're investing in Facebook like it's a growth stock, so they're valuing it, 20 times its annual earnings. But if Facebook is a mature stock, if it's not growing anymore, it's worth like 4 times its annual earnings. And so as soon as the growth peters out, doesn't even have to contract, people do these mass sell-offs. And when Silicon Valley goes crazy, they do this thing they call pivoting, but which everyone else would call panicking. And in the case of Facebook, the pivot was Mark Zuckerberg, arising one morning from his sarcophagus and announcing, friends, I've had a vision. I know I told you that your future consisted of arguing with your racist uncle using this primitive text interface I created in my dorm room so I could non-consensually rate the fuckability of my fellow Harvard undergraduates. But it turns out that the actual future is that I can convert you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character, and I'm going to imprison you in a virtual world called the metaverse I stole from a 25-year-old dystopian cyberpunk novel. And that's when it turns into a pile of shit. And that's Enshittification. It's a tragedy in 3 acts.
Deze tragedie speelt zich niet alleen bij Meta af. Alle grote internetbedrijven zijn de afgelopen jaren verkuttificeerd. Google, ooit groot geworden omdat ze de beste zoekresultaten bood, is de laatste jaren steeds dieper afgegleden.
I think to understand what happened to Google, you need to understand the epidemiology of Enshittification, like why it's all happening right now. When Google started, it was in an environment where it faced 4 different kinds of discipline, 4 ways that it would be punished for failing its users. So the first was competition. And the Google founders, when they started out, I saw them at conferences maybe 4 or 5 times where they would always say the same line: competition is a click away. Because there were lots of different search engines online. And Google was really good. And we switched to Google because competition was a click away. But then, over the 20 years that Google has been around, we continue this long-run phenomenon of failing to enforce competition law, what Americans call antitrust law. And we allowed Google to buy most of its serious competitors. So Google is like monumentally incapable of making a product anyone wants to use. They made one good search engine 25 years ago, and virtually every other in-house project they have launched failed. And almost all of their successes are companies they bought from someone else in direct contravention of the black letter of competition law. So that's their mobile stack, Android, their entire ad tech stack, their server management, customer service, docs, collaboration, maps, satellite. All of these are companies they bought from someone else. They're not Willy Wonka's idea factory. They're rich Uncle Pennybags. They go and buy other people's stuff. Google became not too big to fail, but too big to care. And you can see the moment where it happened in 2019. And you can see it through a series of memos that were published in one of the 3 antitrust trials that Google lost in the last year in the United States. They're a thrice convicted monopolist. And in 2019, Google had run out of growth. They had a 90% market share in search. But when you have 90% of the search market, you can't grow anymore, right? Like, who's gonna search on Google that isn't already searching on Google? I mean, sure, you can raise 1 billion humans to maturity and train them to be Google customers, which is what Google Classroom is. But it takes 18 years. And in the meantime, you need some other way to grow. So in the memos that were published in this antitrust trial, we see an epic clash between 2 different factions of Googlers. There's a guy called Pragavar Raghavan, and Raghavan has this idea. He says, look, we can't make people search more for more things because they're already searching for everything that comes into their mind. They'll type it into a search box. We can't make more people search because we have 90% of the market, but we can make the searches worse. So they have to search more than once in order to get the answer. So for example, if now what we do when you type in pants, we in the background also run a search for trousers on the grounds that you're probably looking for both. We might just not do that. We might not correct your typos if we think you've made a typo. We have 100 little tricks we've developed over the years to make search seem magically good. We'll just stop doing the tricks. And then maybe you search 2 times or 3 times or 4 times, and every time you search, we get to show you some ads. And basically, Raghavan's faction says, we're not gonna lose any users if we do this. We have spent $25 billion a year buying every default search box on every carrier, every operating system, and every browser in the world. It doesn't matter if you're using Firefox, it doesn't matter if you're using Vodafone, it doesn't matter if you're using Android or iOS. Your search box is a Google search box. What are people gonna do if we make search worse? So we should make search worse because it'll make us more money. And at the end of the day, that they won the argument. Now, there have been greedy people at Google since the day one. I know some of those people. There are people at Google who I wouldn't piss on if they were on fire, but those people lost the argument for 20 years. They won the argument because the environment changed to become enshittigenic, to reward people who did bad things.
De verkuttificering is inmiddels zelfs niet meer voorbehouden aan het internet. Ook de wereld buiten onze digitale schermpjes wordt er in toenemende mate mee besmet.
We are seeing the incursion of Enshittification into every sector as it becomes digitalized, right? You add computers to it and you add Enshittification to it. What's actually happening inside the body corporate when it gets the Enshittification disease? And this is a thing I call twiddling. This is when you change the business logic invisibly every time a user interacts with a service in accordance with some algorithm. So prices, costs, search rankings, recommendations, all of this stuff can change every time you use the service. Now, these tricks, they're not sophisticated. They're just done quickly and invisibly in the background. So let's take nurses. Nurses don't work in tech, but tech has taken over nursing. 3 national apps have taken over contract nursing hiring from the dozens or hundreds of local firms that used to do contract nurse hiring for hospitals. So when a nurse signs on for a shift, the app goes to a data broker and buys that nurse's recent credit history. And if the nurse is carrying a high credit card debt load, especially delinquent debt, then the app pays that nurse less because people who are economically desperate work for less money. Now, the impulse to exploit desperate labor is not new, but even the most wicked coal boss of the 19th century could not employ enough guys in green eye shades in a giant boiler room to adjust everyone's pay 100 times a minute to make this work. When you add computers to a sector that is concentrated, that fears neither the discipline of regulators, nor the discipline of labor, nor the discipline of competitors. When you operate in that environment, that enshittigenic environment, then as soon as technology infects a sector, then the sector immediately enshittifies. The reason the internet was better in the first couple of decades and then got worse is because competition law was getting weaker over that time. And so, for example, in the late 1990s, you have the Department of Justice bringing a successful antitrust enforcement action under Bill Clinton against Microsoft. But Microsoft appealed and then ran out the clock. And so when George W. Bush was elected, he just dropped the case. In the meantime, this did have like a very salutary effect on Microsoft. I think arguably the first viral video ever was a video cassette recording that was hand duplicated and passed around of Bill Gates being deposed and losing his cool in a way that even today is quite remarkable. You can see it on YouTube.
Do you want me to define proprietary API or not?
No, I don't want you to define proprietary API. I didn't ask you to define proprietary API.
He was personally humiliated by this. And Microsofties have reported that in the years afterwards, whenever Microsoft contemplated doing something really terrible, like doing to Google what they'd done to Netscape, which is how they ended up in this hot water, people would go like, are you kidding me? They're going to put Bill back on the stand. We don't want that.
Maar angst voor de rechter verklaart niet alles. Doctorow gelooft dat de verkuttificatie van de techreuzen lange tijd in toom gehouden is door hun eigen programmeurs.
Their journey into technology is often that they found in technology a source of liberation and joy. They were in very short supply, and they're extraordinarily productive. So depending on which year you look at the labor statistics for, tech workers are bringing in over $1 million each for their employers. So every worker you add is $1 million in income for their employers. So the employers, they really need those workers. And they need to figure out how to get those workers to put in extremely long hours because even though these workers are super productive, there's not enough of them. You can't just hire as many tech workers as you want. You've got to compete with other places. And so they offer them all kinds of amazing perks. The whimsical campus with free dry cleaning and daycare and like a surgeon who will freeze your eggs so you can work through your fertile years. And this works very well, right? You have these workers who could walk across the street and get a job the same day at the same or better pay, who hang in there and sleep under their desk and miss their mother's funeral to hit some deadline their boss wants them to hit because they really believe in it. When their boss turns around and orders them to enshittify what they've built, they feel a sense of profound moral injury. You did not miss your mother's funeral to add 900 ads to Google Maps. And because they can't be readily replaced, and because they can replace their boss, they tell their boss to fuck off, and their boss just has to take it. And they stood as a bulwark against Enshittification. But when these workers had all this strength, paradoxically, they thought it meant that they didn't need a union. Because if you're strong, why do you need a union? Of course, the time to get a union is when you're strong. It's much harder to get a union when you're weak. But their bosses convinced them they were just temporarily embarrassed founders. They weren't workers. And so union density in the tech sector, rounds to zero. And eventually supply caught up with demand. And tech bosses started to exacerbate this by talking up these fantasy stories about AI coders. If you're a skilled coder, AI can do some of the grunt work for you, and it makes you slightly more productive, but it doesn't let them replace you. And it certainly doesn't let them replace junior coders, because then a senior coder has to go and review their work, and they're in short supply. But what it does do is put the fear of God into programmers and makes them not want to say fuck off. People are very unhappy with it. I think that what you're getting at is what it means to be too big to care. So there's a comedian, Lily Tomlin, and she used to do these parody ads, these funny ads on Saturday Night Live where she would pretend to be an operator for AT&T.
A gracious hello. Here at the phone company, we handle 84 billion calls a year, serving everyone from presidents and kings to the scum of the earth. So we realize that every so often you can't get an operator. For no apparent reason, your phone goes out of order. Perhaps you've been charged for a call you didn't make. We don't care. We don't have to. We're the phone company.
When faced with a choice of the continuous abuse that is using Facebook and losing contact with the communities that matter to you on Facebook, people have thus far, by and large, on balance, chosen Facebook. What's worst about that is that the more vulnerable you are, the harder it is for you to leave. The tech bosses are very finely attuned to ways of increasing what economists call switching costs, the things you have to give up to leave their services. In fact, when the FTC first brought its case against Facebook with the Texas Attorney General, they published internal memos from the rollout of Facebook Photos. And the boss of that program emails Mark Zuckerberg and says, Mark, we're going to make Facebook Photos as good as we can because we want people to use it for their family photos. Because that way, if they quit Facebook and go to Google+, they'll have to give up their family photos. And increasing the switching cost, that's the phrase he used, increasing the switching cost will help us retain users. So this guy doesn't say we'll retain users by being better than Google+. He says we're going to retain users by leaving us more painful than the joy you would get from being on Google+. I think what's happened is they don't fear losing your business anymore. And I think that in tech, we have uniquely powerful ways of disciplining companies with interoperability. Because the only computer we know how to make, the computer that's in the camera that's recording me, the laptop I'm speaking to you through, the distraction rectangle in my pocket, the smart thermostat on the wall over there, they are all functionally the same. They're called Turing-complete universal von Neumann machines, which is a lot of computer science jargon, and all it means is that every computer can run every program. If you get a printer from HP that has a program running in it that checks to make sure that you've bought your ink from HP and not generic ink, another program can disable that check. But we have passed a variety of laws that we call IP laws that make it illegal to do that reverse engineering, to do that programming. So Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, which was passed because the US Trade Representative threatened to impose tariffs on the European Union if they didn't adopt this law. All of these agreements are passed on the threats of tariffs from the United States. And they require that member states, that signatories, pass laws that prohibit reverse engineering and modification without the manufacturer's permission. And so then you have this situation where it is technically possible to have your HP printer and get fed up with the price of HP ink and therefore use generic ink that's refilled by monks in Belgium that got sick of making beer, which is an actual thing that used to exist. Instead, you can no longer run the program that disables the checker in your printer, even though the printer belongs to you, and even though using third-party ink is not a copyright violation. The locks themselves are protected. These locking programs are protected. And that means that the company has you where it wants you. You can't take part of the offer and leave the rest. So the price of ink has gone up and up and up. Ink now runs $10,000 a gallon. It's the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian without taking out a special permit. You print grocery lists with colored water that cost more than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion.
And they're off in the Kentucky Derby.
So we no longer see this discipline of technology. Over and over again, we see these policy failures arising out of monopolies. And those policy failures are creating a constituency, a coalition, that lawmakers everywhere in different contexts have woken up to. So there's a Franco-Italian consortium called Luxottica that make almost every brand of eyeglass frames you've ever seen. Dolce & Gabbana, Coach, Oakley, they own every single brand. They also own almost all the high street stores. They own Sunglass Hut, they own Lens Crafters. They make more than 50% of the optical lenses in the world. They own the largest insurer in the world, a company called IMED. They've raised the price of glasses by 1,000%, right? Now, I wear glasses, so do you, right? We are class allies. Even if we don't give a damn about big tech, we are class allies with anyone fighting monopolies. And that's where the coalition is coming from. So this is the stirrings of a new movement. And it's the stirrings of a new movement because it's a new coalition. Because antitrust is not just about tech. We have, in this decade, experienced an unprecedented growth of anti-monopoly law in all over the world. So European member states, so Germany, France, Spain, but also the EU more broadly with the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. But we have the makings of a movement right now, a global movement against unchecked corporate power, of which big tech is part. And I think that that is where we see the end of Enshittification.